Gerard is going to talk to us and put all of this in context with the Irish consumer today. I've worked with Gerard for many years, and I've often described him as somebody you want to go to battle with. He has an incredible brain, and sometimes he can get his slides to work very quickly.
Keep talking.
Keep talking. Really. Gerard and I were recently involved in another movement which was called Harland. Some of you might be familiar with it. We set it up 3 years ago, and we learned a huge amount in terms of how to start something up from scratch, a brand from nothing. And we also put it to bed last week and declared, as somebody said, a brief victory. We ended up with about close to 6,000 people employed over a 3-year period. So, we're looking at this program as well as a new movement. So, over to you, sir.
And we created content.
And we created a lot of content. You did right.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Well, good morning, everyone. I want to talk to you about the consumer. I want to share with you some recent research we've done looking at just what some of your customers, consumers here in Ireland think about content, think about the world that we're all marketing in and selling in today, and hopefully inspire you with some ideas about how you might engage more successfully, more effectively through your inbound and content strategies with today's consumer. So, let's see if I can get this to work. Right. Great. So I want to first of all put the context. I'm an economist by training, so I always like to follow the money and try and figure out what are we talking about here in terms of people's spending power. So just before I get into what we see happening in terms of life online, just share with you some thoughts about the state of the consumer landscape and economy today. The first thing to talk about is what's going on in the heads, hearts and minds, if you like, of the Irish consumer. If you compare Irish consumer confidence over the past 5 years with consumer confidence throughout the Eurozone, Irish consumer confidence, the green line, Eurozone, the blue line, they kind of moved very similar direction over the past 5 years, except for about the past 12 months. And you can see suddenly Irish confidence picking up very, very significantly, really departing from the picture that we're seeing throughout the rest of Europe. That's important because although confidence is an emotional concept, it's a measure of the mood or something going on, if you like, in people's heads or perception of the future, it is an important driver of behavior, because when you start to look at how this connects with spending patterns, it's really quite significant. So that's kind of the past. What about the future? Well, if you actually look at consumer spending levels right now, and where they're going to go over the rest of this decade, I think you'll find the picture is very, very encouraging. This chart here shows spending at about 83 billion euro by consumers in Ireland last year. It's expected to grow by about 2.5 billion euro a year over the rest of the decade, so that by the end of the decade, 2020, we're looking at spending by Irish consumers totaling over 100 billion euro. So a fairly big cake. Now, just to put that in context, really all it means is that by about 2018, we'll get back to the level of consumer spending we had in 2008. So it's an improving picture, but we've fell a long way and now we're on the way back up again. But still, it's moving in a positive direction. And I guess the question there is, what could you do with a slice of an extra 2.5 billion euros spend every year over the rest of the decade? But that's total spending. And of course, we're here at HubSpot to talk about the digital context for change in consumer markets. And I think it's important to point out that a lot of that extra spending is actually going to be going online. In fact, at the moment, Irish consumers spend just under 6 billion euro online. That's a huge amount of money. Depending on the estimates, but between 2/3 and 3/4 of all that spending is going overseas to Amazon and so on. And by the end of the decade, we expect that that's going to be over 12 billion euro spent by consumers online with their laptops or their tablets or their smartphones. In fact, we're about to launch a more detailed commentary on life online for the Irish consumer tomorrow. So I can't give you too many details. We're doing this report for UBC, but it'll be on our website from tomorrow afternoon. Nevertheless, I think it tells us something very important about the dynamics of change. That level of online spending is growing faster than total consumer spending. So although we have this positive picture emerging, in fact we're seeing a much more positive picture emerging in terms of the digital landscape in Ireland. An interesting dynamic in all of this, of course, is how it's beginning to affect spending offline. This picture here might look like somebody in the supermarket scanning the goods on the shelf, but in fact it's taken from a metro station in Spain, where the guy is actually scanning QR codes with an app from his local retailer on pictures of all the products along the length of the train platform. And by the time he gets home, they're there delivered for him to his home. And this phenomenon is interesting. This research offline purchase online, ROPO, or showrooming as it's sometimes called, is really quite significant. We've been researching this and related trends right across Europe for Liberty Global. And you can see that the incidence of ROPO, research offline, purchase online, is actually quite significant. 3/4 of Polish internet users, 6 out of 10 Irish internet users are now going into shops to check out the goods and the prices and then buying online. Slightly fewer in Germany, the Netherlands, and then in Belgium. But it means here in Ireland that this showrooming phenomenon is very well established, and therefore something that I think a lot of brands and a lot of marketers really have yet to come to terms with in terms of what it means, especially in the context, as I said, of an increasing level of spend online by Irish consumers this year, next year, and really over the rest of the decade. Again, just to frame the scale of this for you, what it means is that if you look at home deliveries of products purchased online, when we did a survey in April, 9 in 10 Irish internet users typically is now ordering one product on average a month, some many more, much more frequently than that, but on average, one product a month on a website for delivery to their home. And they're spending on average on each of those purchases €91. You can see how very quickly you get to 5-6 billion. Indeed, 4 out of 10 of them are actually returning 2 of those products to the people they've ordered online. So there's a new dynamic and almost a parallel economy of activity happening in the digital landscape and in the Irish economy that's not really even been picked up in the official statistics. I do some work with the Central Statistics Office, and we've been debating this whole point that a lot of this spend might have been going into retail spending in the past, but in fact is now almost invisible. It's kind of this invisible digital economy that's come out of nowhere and has huge importance for the future. So that's really just to frame the context for you in terms of the dynamic now underway in Ireland in terms of spending, in terms of the digital economy, and the scale of the opportunities for marketers selling products and services in Ireland, like you or your clients, to the Irish consumer who now is increasingly willing to open their purses and wallets online to shop and to spend, buy products and services, and to relate it to the brands that matter to them in their lives. So that's a little bit about spending power and the power of the consumer spending, consumer in terms of actual economics. What about then the power of me? What are the dynamics, if you like, that we see now shaping the consumer landscape? Well, I would argue that we're now seeing the traditional sales cycle or sales funnel changing quite rapidly, and it's been alluded to already by Thomas, by Michael at the start, by Kieran in his talk. We're seeing fundamental changes in the way in which consumers are now engaging with brands online and sharing content online. I'm sure some of you have seen the Look Up video. Just out of curiosity, how many of you have seen the Look Up video? Show of hands. About a third of you have seen Look Up. Well, it was actually posted by Gary Turk last month. It's been viewed by more than 40 million people since, and that's in just over a month, 5-6 weeks. So it shows you how sharing, the power of sharing, can really escalate very rapidly. Now, ironically, the entire video is about fear of missing out, and yet here's lots of people staring at the screen, when the message of the store of the video, well, you can see it for yourself, is really about how life isn't available in the App Store. You actually do have to sometimes go out there and meet people. But still, it's an interesting indication of that power of the sharing economy. And I suppose the point here is that we're seeing quite significant changes in the marketing and business and sales cycle. And we see it with all our clients in Ireland and indeed in Europe now in terms of how they're trying to grapple with this new dynamic. Just to summarize in a very stylistic way, if you start with awareness of a brand or a product or a service, that, excuse me, that typically is what drives sales. You get into the consideration set. But after sales, and the customer delight that goes with that, comes loyalty, and with loyalty comes advocacy. And it's advocacy through sharing that's increasingly driving awareness. And the point really is that a lot of what's happening now online with Irish consumers is happening over here. Your brand, product, or service, in the absence of an inbound or a content marketing strategy, in effect isn't part of the sales cycle. A lot of the sales cycle is actually happening away from the traditional channels and media that marketing people have used to close the loop, if you like, in terms of awareness, loyalty, sales, and so on. That change is quite fundamental. Let me give you some numbers from a survey that we just finished last week on the scale, particularly focusing here around advocacy, sharing, and even loyalty, to give you a sense of just some of the numbers that we're talking about. So in terms of what's happening now in terms of sharing in Ireland, well, how many people, for example, like something they see on Facebook? Well, among Irish internet users, 29% of people like something on Facebook every day. Another 32% are liking something on Facebook on a weekly or several times a week basis. You're well over half the population already liking something on Facebook. What about liking or disliking something on YouTube? 5%, 1 in 20 internet users are now actually doing that every day in Ireland. 19% are doing it on a weekly or more, or several times a week basis. What about retweeting something on Twitter? Well, again, from our survey last week, 3% of internet users are doing that every day. 13% are doing it on a weekly or several times a week basis. And what about this one? Frequency of visiting a site or website of a brand that you like. 12% are doing that every day. 42% are doing that on a weekly or several times a week basis. So the level of engagement by Irish consumers online with brands, with content, and the implications of that for sharing, etc., is hugely, hugely important. And of course, there are massive differences. I mean, I won't go into it now, but you know, in terms of frequency, differences, men and women much more likely to like something on Facebook, men much more likely to like something on YouTube, and also, of course, by demographics, over 45% of under 25s liking something on Facebook every day. So these are quite important numbers, just telling us the pace and scale of sharing and advocacy as a driver of that sales and marketing cycle today in Ireland. Now that's what consumers themselves do, but of course they have friends in their network doing other things as well. So for example, how often do you see something a friend has liked on Facebook? 39% every day. Another 32% on a weekly or several times a week basis. How often do you receive an email from a friend, perhaps with an embedded link to content that they're sharing? Well, again, we see 6% every day for internet users, 27%, more than a quarter of Irish internet users on a weekly or several times a week basis receiving emails with content or links to content from friends. How often do you receive a retweet, perhaps from someone you're following on Twitter? 5% every day, 16% on a weekly basis. So there's a phenomenal flow of content, of recommendations, of likes, and of sharing now driving that economy in Ireland. So we cannot underestimate the scale and speed of what's happening at the moment. Another interesting indicator of the power of the sharing economy is when we look at the use of comparison websites. So for example, 77% of consumers in Ireland use comparison websites. What are the most popular? TripAdvisor. 64% of internet users have used TripAdvisor at some stage. Of those who've used comparison websites, sorry, 56% of those who've used comparison websites have used Trivago, and 34% have used Carzone. So they're using these sites and the content in them to actually make decisions and ultimately make purchases. How many of them are driven by this content to actually make a purchase? The numbers are really quite phenomenal. The percent of people who bought something in different categories because of the reviews they've read online, 69% have bought electronic goods on the basis of reviews they've read about a particular item or product they wanted to buy. 63% have bought a car because of reviews or content that was available to them online. Even 58%, 6 out of 10, have purchased clothes or footwear because of reviews that they've seen online. So there's a phenomenal power, economic impact from this sharing economy that's shaping the landscape at the moment. So all of this itself would be quite interesting, but then I guess if you're in marketing or sales, you're kind of wondering, well, so what? Does this actually ultimately gain my brand, give my brand or product or service an advantage if I'm engaged in the sharing economy, looking at the power of content and so on? We ran an interesting little experiment where we actually took real reviews of a particular laptop, and we split our sample into 3. The sample were several hundred consumers who were interested in buying a laptop online. 1/3 of them were exposed to primarily negative comments. 1/3 were exposed to a mix of positive and negative comments. And 1/3 were exposed to just positive comments. So you can imagine this is quite a significant impact. And that's all they saw. We removed the branding from the laptop itself. So all they saw was an image of a laptop, and they got to read either all negative, mix of positive and negative, and then all positive. So we then asked them, just on the basis of the reviews that you've read online, how much, in principle, would you be willing to pay for this particular laptop? Those who read all negative reviews said €131 after all of that. Those who read a mix of positive and negative said maybe it goes as far as €192 on average. Those who read all positive reviews said they would pay nearly €300 for the laptop, more than double the level of those who just read negative reviews. So I think it's telling us something very important about the influence of that shared content, of those likes and tweets and so on consumer behavior and on the propensity to spend. Really powerful economic impact from the conversation we're having around inbound and content marketing. And I suppose one of the most important things in all of this is that when you go back to the sales cycle, awareness, sales, advocacy, a lot of that sharing also has an impact on loyalty, also has an impact on that sense of people feeling they've made the right decision, feeling they belong with, they've chosen the right brands to be consumers or customers of. And one of the things that we've been looking at is who are the brands right now in Ireland who are, in the eyes of Irish consumers, having the most positive impact on their experience, their lives today. We call this net supporter score. So it's the percent of people who say that this brand is making my life easier versus the percent who say it's making my life harder. Here's the ranking for Ireland today. Which of the brands making your life easier, making your life harder? It's all the digital brands. Facebook, Google, Samsung, Microsoft, Apple, they're all up there. Making life harder, well, that's your utility companies, your banks, your government, unfortunately. But by and large, what it tells us is that a lot of brands and a lot of consumers today find that their life online, their engagement with digital brands and products and services and channels is an essential part of their daily experience in terms of finding things that make life easier in the context of so many challenges, so many difficulties today. So all of these things mean that they have a big impact on customer loyalty and customer retention. And remember, it's all of that that ultimately drives awareness and advocacy and sales. And just to finally give you some thoughts on how important loyalty really is, and you can see this is the economist in me, I do like the numbers. We actually did a survey 2 months ago where we asked people about their membership of different loyalty schemes, and we created an index called the Loyalty Performance Index. We did it jointly with Chili Pepper Marketing. And one of the things that we did was we looked at the shopping behavior and shopping spending of people who are in a loyalty scheme and people who are not in a loyalty scheme. So a Tesco shopper who is in their scheme versus a Tesco shopper who's not in their scheme, a Dunnes shopper, a Boots shopper, a Debenham shopper, and so on. And what we did is we contrasted the spending of those in the loyalty scheme with the spending of those not in the loyalty scheme. They still go to the same shop, they still shop there, but what's the difference of being in the loyalty scheme, just in the loyalty scheme versus not in the loyalty scheme? In the case of Tesco's, there's an 80% difference between the average spend of a consumer in a loyalty scheme and a consumer in Tesco, a shopper in Tesco who's not in their scheme. In the case of Topaz, there's a difference of, on average, of 32% in the spend of a consumer who's in their particular loyalty scheme and a Topaz shopper who's not in their particular loyalty scheme. And in the case of Boots, there's a 28% difference in the spend, on average, of a Boots shopper who's in their scheme and a Boots shopper who's not in their scheme. So all of this simply says is that there are real economic imperatives behind the discussion we're all having today around inbound marketing, around the power of content, and the importance of connecting successfully with the consumer before, during, and after the sales process, and making sure that you are part of that sales cycle, even the parts where it's harder and harder in the form of advocacy, etc., to really have your voice heard. Because all of these things impact on people's attitudes, and ultimately it's their attitudes that drive their behavior, and that behavior is whether to shop or buy from you or not. So to sum up, I guess in terms of what this is telling us, in terms of getting inbound, I've talked about the new cycle, the power of advocacy, loyalty, and sharing, and driving awareness, the recognition that an awful lot of that now is happening outside of your control, and the only way to bring it back into control is through the kind of successful, effective content and inbound marketing strategies that will reinforce and ultimately corral some of that sharing, referring, comparing dynamic to your benefit as a brand or as a product. So really then, just to sum up, I think we're at the start of something really big here in terms of the Irish consumer landscape. We're starting, first of all, from a much more benign economic outlook. We're seeing the power of digital trends and the emergence of the digital economy. And that digital recovery is something that is going to be a very big story, if you like, for marketers and for businesses this year, next year, and really over the rest of this decade, when you look at the cumulative levels of spending that we're talking about. But we also have to recognize that the Irish consumer is involved in a new journey. That customer journey is no longer something that you can control or corral the way it used to be in the old world of old media and so on. That now it's essential that through your work, through the power of content and so on, that you're engaging with that new consumer in that new journey effectively for your benefit. And don't forget, ultimately, all of this has a payback. I know that the marketing Miris of this world will ultimately be held accountable for not just the power or effectiveness of their marketing campaign, but their contribution to the top line in terms of revenue. And more of my clients now have chief revenue officers as well as marketing CMOs. So I think it's important to think about the actual bottom line and top line impact, economic impact of your content strategy, of your sharing strategy, and of that new economic dynamic that is out there, which I think is going to unlock massive opportunities for value for you and your businesses, for your brands, not just in Ireland, but ultimately outside of Ireland as well. Thank you.
Any questions for Gerard while he's standing?
Gerard, Yeah, good speech. Thank you. Just one thing, you say you advise the CSO to obviously advise the government and all that, going into figures and forecasts and trends. At the moment, the ratio is 2/3 of orders and purchases are going outside of the country. So there must be huge economic implications coming down the line for employment, in terms of warehousing, packaging, sales, distribution, and all that which is now coming from outbound, inbound kind of phrase. What kind of view is they taking on government strategy for this onslaught of increase in online, especially the way the ratio is at the moment, 75-25 or what it is? Yeah.
I think there are probably two responses to the disproportionate share of spend going outside of Ireland. We're not the only country facing this challenge. Even countries like Poland or further afield, New Zealand, have exactly the same problem. The responses are mostly around, well, first of all, measurement. Believe it or not, we don't really know the scale of this, and it's a struggle even for national statistical authorities throughout Europe to get a handle on the scale of this digital economy, which is extraordinary when you think about just how big it has got almost overnight. But the second thing then is, from a business perspective, and this is very important from a government perspective too, is how indigenous companies or players can get more of a share of that spend. And some of that boils down to, among other things, first of all, simply having an online presence. It's quite remarkable, and I can see it with some of my clients, including retail clients in particular, who are remarkably behind schedule in terms of having an effective, engaging online channel strategy, whether it's a website, an app, or content marketing, to divert people who would shop with them but are shopping elsewhere because they're simply not aware of an online offering. So I think part of the big response, or the key part of the initial response anyway, is for indigenous players to develop effective online digital marketing and content strategies that will divert some of that spend. Because one of the things that's very clear from our own research is that when you talk to Irish consumers, they're more than happy to buy from Irish operators and Irish sellers online, but a lot of the time they simply don't feel they have the option. It's not there, or it's not presented to them. And that's where I think there's a crucial role for content marketing and inbound marketing to win that awareness game, as Thomas said, get the ball to the kick-ups to the top so that people actually know you're there. Any other questions over here?
Just a quick point. You said that the consumer confidence is on the way up, but that was largely, or is largely fueled by the fact that possibly prices are going up. But the reality in the economy, middle-ranking wages have been going down. Younger people coming up are working on internships. So actually, there might be more confidence because we see house prices going up. We think something's happening. But in the reality, middle section wages are going down. Young people's wages are evaporating in terms of internships. So I can't really see, I can hopefully see things picking up, but I can't really see them picking up. And this gentleman asked about what's the government doing about this online stuff. One thing is rolling out, spending $500 million, rolling out broadband throughout the country. And that's very good for tech companies, but what it will do is start shutting down the small shops in the high street, which will lead to more unemployment. So I think I wouldn't share your optimism that things are going to go up steadily in that ground.
Well, again, I wouldn't say that ever a smooth upward trend in any economic variable. And certainly you're right to say that confidence itself is driven by a lot of people's perceptions of what's happening in the economy. And one of the obvious things, here we are in the heart of Dublin. We're at the heart of almost a parallel economy to what's happening outside of Dublin. There are really three economies now in Ireland. There's Dublin, particularly this part of Dublin. There are the other cities, the main cities, Cork, Limerick, and Waterford, and so on, Galway. And there's the rest of Ireland, particularly outside of the main towns and cities, and that's in a very flat or even regressive place. So, in fact, it's going to, I think, when you look at those projections, they may seem very bullish and positive, but they're really only projecting 1 or 2% growth a year. It's not 4, 5, 6%, 8 or 9% like we had in the good old days. So I think that's definitely something that we're not going to see any return to the kind of the boom, and I think it's going to be a very uneven recovery in that sense. The other thing then on your point about rolling out broadband, I would simply say that the challenge for the retailers is to turn that into their benefit rather than see it as a threat. So for example, in the Netherlands, where we've been doing some work recently in Amsterdam, some of the local governments there have introduced free Wi-Fi networks on the main streets in their towns or suburbs in order to get people to come to those locations and for the benefit of the retailers in the stores. So the retailers can then offer, if you like, free content or free Wi-Fi, and even some of them are developing comparison apps so they can compare, spend, and try and get the best deals locally rather than, and match the best prices that are online in the local shop. So they're trying to turn it to their advantage.
I'd also like to add a more optimistic voice to what this gentleman was saying. I work for a company called Optical. We do software for opticians. A lot of opticians are small shops, and a lot of opticians are small shops in small towns. We have a product that allows them to go online and sell online and compete with the large multiples in a way that the large multiples can't do, because they can at the same time offer the personalized offer that your local retailer has, plus a presence online to give the convenience that the internet has. Another example, I fly helicopters, modern helicopters, take photos and stuff like that. And a couple of the retailers in Dublin have most of the stuff we buy in the helicopter world is shipped from China. And it's very inconvenient because it takes 3 weeks to get here, and it gets stopped by customs 2 or 3 times. So the apparent saving that you do by buying online is evaporated by the shipping costs and the customs. So there's 2 or 3 companies in Dublin who have decided to fight that and warehouse in Dublin and ship from Dublin. And people will prefer them because you get your stuff in a week, and the price that's on the website is the price you pay because there's no shipping and there's no customs. So it's pretty much down to how the market wants to fight back. And it's not down to the government, it's down to the people to fight back and to fight ways to fight back.
I'd advise no business to wait for the government to solve your problem, so better get on with it yourself.
Gerard, can I ask you a quick question? One of your figures up there, 42% are visiting brand websites. That took me by surprise. Have you any insights on that? Is that a particular audience? Are they particular websites? But 42% of people going visiting a website, and that was each week. Where's that coming from? That's a huge number.
I think it's partly that it's driven by a combination of e-commerce, so there might be either going to shop on brand websites, or it could be driven, and there are a lot of people shopping on particular brands, Net-a-Porter's and ASOS and so on in this world. But it's also driven by people being engaged with brands, either at a functional level, it could be their bank, or it could be their mobile phone company or a utility company to check their bills and so on, or they're simply receiving content that attracts them back in to maybe check the latest statement, those kind of things. So there are a lot of things happening around people's experience and engagement with brand websites that is, I think, getting more and more common. It's now increasingly common if you switch, for example, we do a lot of work on switching between suppliers and utilities and banks and mobile phones. There's an incentive now if you switch your electricity bill, you get so much off it if you go for paperless bills. So that whole paperless dynamic means that you're going to go to the brand website much more often than you would otherwise go. So there's a number of drivers like that, and I think you're right. I was surprised by it too, but it seems to be quite substantial, and I suspect it's going to get bigger.
Yeah. Okay. Any further questions for Gerard?
Johnny Kenton, the business coach. Just with regards to Tesco, well, Tesco have an 8% difference in loyalty in their loyalty scheme. Yet they're losing a huge amount of their market to Ali and Lidl. And Ali and Lidl appear to be using outbound marketing rather than inbound marketing. So what is the reason for that, or is there any particular statistics?
Well, around more than just loyalty schemes. I mean, obviously, loyalty is about retention, but you also have to recruit customers, and I think that's a separate side of the strategy for Tesco where they let themselves down, and I don't think they've been obviously not as successful in competing with the discounters in terms of recruiting new customers. It also simply tells you that increasingly loyalty and retention, whilst you can succeed and win in that, it doesn't stop there. You have to keep hold on to customers. You have to battle for an increased share of their purse or wallet. And I think that what we're seeing now is that there's going to be an increasing number of intensive competition. I think Lidl or Aldi, I can never remember which one, has something like 250,000 likes on Facebook in Ireland alone, and they're using that social media landscape, and as well as email marketing, of course, through their easing to drive a lot of awareness of what they have to offer. So they're trying to compensate for the absence of a loyalty scheme in that respect. So I think there's a challenge there for Tesco.
And one more question, just on say the likes of the challenge for Amazon. For argument's sake, I shop online a lot, but I go to Amazon and I would then go to a book depository, because a lot of the times you can get free delivery no matter what book you buy, and it's a cheaper price, same service, same quality. The quality of the information on Amazon is far better than on book depository, but the price and the delivery is the same. The quality of service is the same. So how do you battle against those issues when you are actually online and inbound marketing, yet you're competing on price?
Well, it sounds like Book Depository are doing a good job in terms of competing with Amazon.
Well, not a lot of people are aware of it. Again,
more people are aware of it now.
Yeah.
So their Book Depository need a good inbound or content marketing strategy to build that awareness.
But the question is, how do you compete on price? It seems to get down to compete on price when there are equal partners in the market.
Yeah. It never gets down to just price. Price is what you pay and value is what you get.
No, I appreciate that, but the two companies are similar, not exactly the same, but the quality of the product and the service is the same, yet the price is different. So how do you compete against that?
Price is different on Amazon depending on who you are. Their algorithms and their cookies will offer you a different price for the same book depending on who you are. Obviously there's a level of refinement and tailoring going on even with Amazon that is affecting price as well. So I would say that for me it's never going to always just be about price, and I think that's part of what we're having the conversation today, is that in a digital world the danger is it ends up flatlining. Everybody has to pay the price because it becomes commoditized. But clearly the promise of content marketing and inbound marketing is that you can differentiate yourself in terms of the value of what you're offering, so that it doesn't just get down to price, because an indigenous Irish retailer is never going to beat an Amazon on price, but if they can actually come up with other ways of adding value or differentiating themselves or the product or the after-sales experience, so that people want to talk about it, share it, then a few percentage points different price isn't going to make much difference. There are massive differences in prices out there all the time, 20%, 25% difference in electricity prices between different offers, mobile phone prices and different offers or different networks, but people don't swap just on price. The other drivers of that decision to stay or to buy. All right.